Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I would like to thank all the people in the audience. This is great. I was wondering if anybody would show up to hear about litter because litter doesn't sound that interesting, but hopefully when we're done tonight, you'll find it interesting. So I just titled this paper Sacred Litter, for lack of a better title. And I'm going to show quite a few slides. Some are going to go really fast, some are going to go slow. You'll notice I have text on a lot of the slides in case there's anyone in the room that's hearing impaired. I have a couple friends that are hearing impaired that will probably watch this on YouTube when Santa Cruz Archaeological Society puts it on their YouTube channel. And so the text will help them kind of understand what I'm talking about. And if you can't understand what I'm saying, you can also read along with some of the text as well. So let me share my screen. Okay.
You should be sharing already.
I am, and it doesn't want to advance. So should I go out of share and go back in?
You can
Let
try
me
that.
stop share and then let me share again. Hold on, everybody. This should just take a minute. And now, your screen sharing. Hold on, I'll catch up. Oh, there we go. Share.
You want to play the slideshow from the beginning?
Oh, there we go. I'm glad there's someone in the room that's smart.
Well, I don't know about that.
Okay.
But
Okay, now, hey, that was what we needed.
yeah.
Someone that knew what I was doing wrong.
Yay.
I've done so many of these, and every time they're always challenging because when you're here and everybody's kind of looking at you and you're kind of a shy person, well, and I am kind of shy, but maybe I won't be tonight because I'm really looking forward to talking to you about sacred litter. Now, sacred litter, and I wrote it here, can two words be more diametrically opposed than these two? Or might they be more complementary than we might first assume? So we're going to find out. So think about that again. Sacred litter. Here, a number of years ago, I had a project on top of Mount Diablo, and we were expanding our ADA accessible trail around the summit, and some things were found. And I went out to do my archaeological survey, and I discovered one of the more unique sites I think I've ever seen. I've worked on 5 continents as an archaeologist for over 50 years, and I've seen some pretty cool things. But in a weird sort of way, this was one of the neatest things I've ever found. It was a mountainside full of junk, garbage, trash, litter. And yet within the litter, I saw some things that stood out. I ended up doing a paper for the Society for American Archaeology 10 years ago, and more recently published it. It was a book on the intersection of sacredness and archaeology, where the two come together, archaeology and the sacred. And in looking at all the stuff, and you can see here, let's see if the cursor works, golf balls, styrofoam cups, pocket knives, watches, spoons, screws, light bulbs, blah, 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 and a lot of coins, pennies, dimes, quarters, nickels, a lot of coins, thousands of coins. The coins stood out. It's like, what's going on here? If you've been to the top of Mount Diablo, you know this building. This is the Summit Museum, built in 1939 and 1940 by the Civilian Conservation Corps. And it's sort of a visitor center museum. And you can go upstairs and stand on this deck, and you look out over the world to the east. And it's a magnificent view. And independently of one another, thousands of visitors for the last however many years have been throwing things off the top up there, especially coins, thousands of coins. So I did a survey. I did a random sample collection to try to figure out what was going on. It's trash, it's litter. The state doesn't want people throwing this stuff off. But at the same time they're throwing things off, they're leaving remains up there too. The summit is just everywhere you look, you will see cremains if you go up on an average day. And So people identify the top of Mount Diablo as a special place. So some people are trashing it, throwing styrofoam cups and breaking beer bottles. Other people might be honoring it in some way by making this sacrifice, kind of like throwing a coin in a wishing well. Maybe they're praying for good health, success, peace, cure for cancer. So in my study, I identified three classes of artifacts: litter, loss, and sacrifice. Litter was those things that were thrown away that had no value, should have been put in a garbage can, but they were thrown away. Loss were things that fell out of people's pockets, especially if they were going up and down this steep slope off trail on a talus slope. They take a stumble and they lose an earring or a pocket knife, or, that's why I think I was seeing as far as loss. And then sacrifice, things like the coins that had value that had been thrown away in the thousands. Um, some definitions here before I go any further: sacred, a venerated place; litter, an item that has depleted value that's disposed of inappropriately; sacrifice, like the coins tossed into a wishing well; purchase, to seek good fortune or success; and a perch, atop a mountain or beside a wishing well or fountain. So, as an archaeologist and as an anthropologist, I wanted to go back and look at how other people have described artifacts. And one of the classics was Louis Binford in 1962, when he looked at technomic, sociotechnic, and idiotechnic artifacts. Technomic were just very utilitarian artifacts. Sociotechnic were like gold rings, wedding bands, and pearl necklaces, things that showed your social identity. And then idiotechnic were like religious, spiritual artifacts, things that had a religious connotation. Later, Michael Shifter looked at discard, disposal, and loss. Discards are the things you throw out. Disposal are the things you put with the dead. And the lost things make sense for themselves. A real interesting study was by William Walker on ceremonial trash. Is it possible to identify ceremonial trash? And that's getting closer to what I'm talking about tonight. And then finally, Robin Osborne looked at dedicated objects, votives, offerings, things like that. Now, 2 days ago, I saw this in the newspaper. Trash found deep inside a Mexican cave turns out to be 500-year-old artifacts from a little-known culture. This was down in the cave, and they found some shell bracelets. These are all, pre-Columbian shell bracelets and other types of artifacts. And I was reminded of the saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure. In the beginning, these cave explorers thought they found some trash that had been left behind. But upon closer inspection, they recognized a value to what they were seeing, a meaning, a purpose, which is what archaeologists do when we look at artifacts. So here's the thing I was doing a few years ago, the intersection of sacredness and archaeology. My chapter was called Finding Sacrifice Atop an Island in the Sky, and that's Mount Diablo. And that's where I was talking about litter, loss, and sacrifice, which I'll talk about tonight. So let's look at the Mount Diablo summit. On the left here, you see the Summit Museum, built in 1939, 1940. You can actually see the deck up here where people are standing, looking at the view, and when no one's looking, probably throwing things off. And here's the talus slope down below, just 2 pennies, I photographed. Saw a lot more than that. Prior to 1939, there was a wooden deck there at the same place, right on the top of the mountain. And I think people were throwing things off even earlier, because some of the coins I saw went back to like 1920. And I have no doubt that there's even earlier coins that are up there now. Everything's slowly going down the hill. Here's just a sample of the coins I collected for dating, quite literally looking at the dates. This talus slope is really steep, dangerously steep. In fact, steep. I had an accident and hurt my knee, which I'm still getting over 15 years later. But it's very slippery. It's overgrown with brush. Summertime, a lot of rattlesnakes. It's not where anybody should be, and we don't want people there. There's no trail there. I think people have gotten off trail every now and then. They take a spill and they lose things. But most of the coins that have been thrown off are hiding under the rocks or the brush. I found a few little loci where I could see the surface of the rocks, and collected about 250 coins to date and to look at. But there were so many other things. Here are some of the other things. These are mostly from from the CCC. That piece of copper on the left here came off of the roof when they were doing the copper roof on the little tower. Bent screws, and there's a cartridge case, keys. This thing over here is a horseshoe nail. That's a square nail. Sardine can, a key. Here's a key. Um, here's a McDonald's toy that was thrown off. Part of a bakelite panel, probably from a radio. Your golf, it's not an archaeological site unless you find a marble or a golf ball. So here's a golf ball. There were others down there. Pocket knife. And then look at that red shoe. Now, on my computer, my face is hiding the shoe, but I know there's a shoe right up here in the upper right. It came off a Jenny Bright doll from about circa 1963, but it's way down the rock slope where there's no trail. And if you were to take the shoe on the top of the museum and throw it, it wouldn't go anywhere. It's too light. So how did it get way down the hillside? I assume someone threw the entire doll down. And just like a traffic accident, if a pedestrian, it's gross, but if a pedestrian gets run over, usually the shoes come off. The shoe came off on impact. The doll might still be down there somewhere, but I found the shoe. What was the shoe? What's the doll doing down there? You know, is it reckless litter? Is it a lost thing? Or is it sacred litter? Now I envision a sibling getting mad and throwing a sister's or doll over and losing it. Maybe someone sacrificed it. And we've certainly seen sacrifice like that. This is a fictitious drawing of a Mayan woman being sacrificed in the sacred cenote. Archaeological studies have shown that actually a lot of the people that were thrown into the cenote were young men, not women like this, but there were some. So maybe Jenny Bright was a sacrifice, or maybe just a sibling upset with a sister or brother, throwing the doll away. It's the type of thing, though, that as an archaeologist, I find fascinating. So can sacrifice be sacred litter? So we have litter, discarded items perceived to have no value, items that may still have value but are lost, items of value intentionally discarded at the place deemed sacred. Where would Jenny Bright fit into that? And if you were the archaeologist having to deal with collecting the stuff and taking it to the trash bin, how would you write it up? Or would you just ignore it? I think a lot of archaeologists would probably ignore it. I did survey on Mount Tamalpais, and I found the same thing. Maybe not quite as dramatic, but I also didn't have accessibility like I did on Mount Diablo. But here are some of the things I found. This is a reproduction of an arrowhead that you buy in like souvenir shops in the Southwest. It's made in northern Mexico or in Arizona. It's an exotic material for our area. Had been left under some rocks up on top. Here's a medallion that was inscribed with a lady's name on the back, who I looked up, and she lived on the East Coast and died, I think, in the early 90s. How this got out here, I don't know, but I assume a family member. And then here, 3 pennies, 4 pieces of beach glass, and a champagne top and the popper there in a little secluded area just down from the peak. The beach glass doesn't occur naturally on Mount Tam. Someone brought it there along with the 3 pennies. Is that sacred litter? Or did it just come out of their pockets, Going back to Mount Diablo, here are some other, this is an offering site just before you get to the top of the mountain, off the side of the road in the parking lot, out in the woods. Rangers found this conglomeration of stuff. It's litter. I mean, it's litter. But look at it. There's 3 hourglasses here and poker cards. There's a cat, all types of other little odds and ends. Did someone have a magic making site? Is it a shrine? Was it sacrifice? Versus this. Here's at the same time a pot garden that we found on Mount Diablo. And as the raiders came in, the growers took off and left their camp. And, it kind of looks like litter, but it's a camp. And how would you look at these artifacts? There's some boots there. There's some things in the bucket. Actually, just out of the photo, there's a handful of coins. The person sleeping on this sleeping bag was tossing coins into a plastic bucket, probably for entertainment. Is there a difference in this and that? It looks like a bunch of junk, but they both have their different stories. The artifacts do. So here's a really cool story. This is where I live. I live beside a mid-century resort in the Valley of the Moon. This is the old dance floor that's no longer here. This was a saloon called the Stumble Inn. There was a house and there was a barbecue joint here. And in the 50s, from 1945 to 1956, the Marin County coroner and his son, the deputy coroner, had the resort, and they used to entertain 200 to 500 people at a time, chicken barbecues and drinking and dancing all night. The son was a war hero. He came home from the World War II with a bunch of medals. His father was the coroner for Marin County, and when the son came home, he hired his son as the deputy coroner. And then in 1950, the dad stepped down, and the son ran for office and was elected. He became the coroner. Really interesting family. And here's some of the things. So during COVID, I had my son work on an archaeological recording to record the place that we live to keep him from going crazy during isolation. So he spent a year, and these are just a selection of things, including a deputy coroner badge that got tossed out, which is kind of interesting. But what we found lots of silverware, and we'd seen the silverware in our backyard. The resort is next door, but things were getting thrown into the woods behind our house. And that was kind of a mystery. So this is a selection of the silverware, the knives and forks and spoons. Also, a lot of bottle openers we found. And what I realized is that the resort is having these get-togethers in the late afternoon and into the evening. You have a dump. John identified the Keaton's dump, and we worked with the Keaton family in this project. We identified the dump, and that's where the Keatons and their workers would throw things at the end of the event. And we found what I call dark litter, and that's the stuff that was being thrown toward our house at night when no one could see. And it's knives and forks and can openers and the occasional beer bottle. So you have things going into the dump, and you have things being thrown into the darkness. The darkness is a really important thing archaeologically, anthropologically. The dark zone is where magic can happen. People don't see you, so you go into Altamira or Lascaux, and you go into these dark spaces and internal light, and you see these beautiful paintings, and you're in a sacred space. It's almost like that dark space. When the sun went down, the woods behind my house became this dark space that you could throw a knife or a bottle opener into. Not the workers and not the owners, but the guests were doing that for some reason. Just like the guests of Mount Diablo are throwing things off this deck here. If you throw something off of Mount Diablo in broad daylight, there's still a dark zone, because once you throw it, you lose sight of it. The slope is so steep and it's so vegetated, you can't see where anything lands. And it's almost like throwing it into this dark zone. That's looking down. Things are going way down into the brush down here. And you don't see it hit in most cases. And when the clouds are in, this is up on top of Mount Diablo, when the clouds are in, you especially don't see it. It's almost like there's a veil here, and the things pass through the clouds and disappear. Now, earlier this year, John Foster gave a talk at the SCA meeting in Burlingame about a cenote in the Dominican Republic. Alita here. This is his graphic. And you walk up to the opening to the cenote, and you look down, you see the top of the water, and you look down, and there's this layer that you can't see through of sulfur water. And then if you dive, you get back in clear water, and then you find all the artifacts that have been sacrificed over the years. No human remains, but a lot of bowls and gourd containers and trays of food and wooden artifacts have been tossed in here for the last 1,000 years. And they're down here. Someone standing up here tossing an offering, a sacrifice, it disappears from view, just like the penny does off of Mount Diablo, or something at the sacred cenote at Chichen Itza. It's almost like there's a veil that you can barely see through. This is sacrifice. Here's a fictitious Mayan sacrifice of a young lady at the cenote. This is Peru in the Andes, where I've worked. And we know that young people, often children of special families, were sacrificed willingly on top of sacred mountains. They were left in a stupor. And over here, this is Java in Indonesia. There's a tribe there that every year climbs to the top of Mount Bromo, which is a volcano, and to appease the volcano and to bring good fortune, they throw things in: chickens, sheep, lambs, baskets, items of food, sacrificing for good luck. Here's two beautiful bowls from Arizona, from the Memphis pottery, the Mogollon culture, that have these kill holes or spirit holes, which are thought to release the spirits. So these bowls can go either with their owners or on their own into this other world. Which brings me to this photo. Here are bowls and plates being broken, probably for different reason. The lady on the right is obviously really mad. I don't know this. I got this off the internet. That's no one I know. I've never had anyone so mad they'd break dishes like that. But she's breaking dishes. And over here, it's a Mediterranean wedding. I think this is Greece probably, where they're dancing on dishes, which is for success and good luck, an old tradition. I would say that maybe on the left, you have festive litter. Now, afterwards, this lady or whoever she's mad at has to come in and clean up the dishes on the kitchen floor. They're probably just going to go right into the waste can without a lot of thought. But what about the person cleaning up the dishes on the dance floor at the wedding? Do you handle those differently, or is it just litter and trash? Is it possible that some of the guests or maybe the bride and groom take part of this home as a souvenir? Does that bring you good luck, or is it just breaking it? I don't know a lot about that custom, but I find it fascinating. We break things for a lot of different reasons. Here is here's Lenin getting pushed over. I've worked quite a bit in Russia after the fall of the communists, and I saw a lot of Lenin statues and getting pushed over or had been pushed over. Think about the implication of that, and think about Easter Island. By the early 1700s, historians say that all the Moya had been pushed over. Some have been re-erected since then, but they've been pushed over for whatever reason, political reason. You get two clans or two moieties or two tribes or two nations upset with one another. You do things like that. You push over Lenin's statue, or you push over these. We're kind of going through that in our country right now with some of the statues and monuments that have been talked about getting rid of or replacing as factions debate history. This is the chancellery in Berlin when the Red Army took Berlin. And one of the first things they did is they got rid of this symbolic eagle on the gate of the chancellery to make a statement. And even better, here's the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, it got erected in 1961 as a political statement, and it got taken down in 1989 as a political statement. But I'm looking at the litter. See the litter down here, the broken pieces? What do you make of that? If you're the archaeologist going over there years later and studying the wall, and there's still chunks of that wall, is that just litter that was left behind by vandals? Is it litter that was left behind by patriots? Is it festive litter? What can be made of that? Is it even sacred litter? And here's why I say that. Here on the left is Ronald Reagan Park in San Bernardino. And in the middle, you see the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley. Those are portions of the Berlin Wall that were brought back to honor President Reagan. It's almost like those are sacred relics in a way, politically sacred relics. And on the right, look at there. You can go on eBay tonight and buy a piece of the Berlin Wall. There's hundreds of pieces for sale at any time on eBay and other internet sales like that. The person buying that, is it a relic? Is it a souvenir? Does it almost invoke the sacred? I don't know it invokes the sacred, but it's not just litter. Someone picked this up and they're selling it. So garbage, trash, litter. Anybody at Woodstock in '69? If so, raise your hand. Is there anyone in the room that was at Woodstock? This was Woodstock a day later. And, it rained, it got muddy. It's kind of a mess. All these years later, archaeologists went out to do a study, and they didn't find a lot. So whoever cleaned up Woodstock did a pretty good job, but they missed a few things. Why would you want to study pop tops? Is this good archaeology? I think it's good archaeology because it tells us right there something about the cleanup, which is important to know. This is another photo from Woodstock. Look at this pile of garbage here. They actually had dedicated dump areas, which is probably why it was easier cleaning up, but they had dedicated dump areas. Now think about a dump versus litter. This gets a little crazy, so bear with me. I was trained as a structural anthropologist, French structural anthropologist, so I'm more that than an archaeologist. So I look at what I call the wow, and I look at culture. There's culture and there's counterculture, and counterculture is part of the wow. And you can be an outlaw motorcycle gang, you could be a wolf that everybody's afraid of, or a grizzly bear. That's the wow. It means culture doesn't completely control it. It doesn't conform to cultural mores. And litter is part of that wow. We don't want litter. It's unacceptable, it's unregulated, it's purposeless in our mind. So it's outside culture. But a dump is inside culture. It's purpose, regulated, it's acceptable. So there you had a little dump at Woodstock. which is kind of cool. Here's a site I worked on. This is south coast of Peru. It's a 2,000-year-old site way down near the Chilean border. And it's a typical midden. I mean, I see there's a potsherd here, a lot of shell, some maize cobs, corn cobs. You start thinking about the archaeological record, and is it possible to see, we see garbage, we see trash. Some of it might be sacred, some might not be. But do we see litter? And so I'm looking on this little chart here, and I don't know if this is anything or not. It's just some ideas I've had. But you have ancient and you have modern, you have random unorganized, and you have organized. And a dump can be organized and litter can be unorganized. So looking at ancient, what about flake scatters? If you have a flake scatter in your own home, that's your business. But what if you're making stone tools in the commons area? Is that litter? Is the cultural norm that you clean up afterwards? Is that why in archaeology we find areas that we don't find a lot of sharp flakes? In other words, we do. Butchering sites where you leave the remains behind, quarry debris. I've dug 2 prehistoric quarries, and there's a lot of debris left behind. Could you consider that litter? Does it have purpose? Versus trash pits, kitchen middens, shell mounds, or in our case now, trash bins, dumps, burn piles. So there's private and there's public spaces. And my question is, can you litter your own private space? In other words, an empty soda can and a bag of chips dropped on a city sidewalk is litter. I think we all agree that's litter. But what if you drop it on the floor of your own home? Does litter violate social norms? I think it does. So does litter only apply in a public space? Going back to the idea about the flake scatters, public versus private space, homes versus city commons or village commons. Just a way of looking at litter. And then offerings, ceremonial trash, sacred litter, sacrifice. So here's Kurt Cobain. On the right is a shrine in front of his house, created the night of his death. And if you know the story, he killed himself up in Seattle. And that's the spontaneous shrine that appeared. Now, at some point, the city had to come out and clean that up. It's litter. There's flowers. There's probably food. There's candles that are burning down, pieces of paper that if it rains get all wet and soggy. Is it litter, or does it get handled in a different way? And if an anthropologist is involved, do they come out and make a collection of certain things to retain to tell the story of this event and also his life? Equally, here's the Michael Brown Memorial. This is where Michael Brown died in the middle of the street. And there's a spontaneous shrine here. And I have a number of photos of it, and every photo is different because over the days, things came and went. Here, there's a lot of stuffed animals and a lot of flowers. There are other times when there's candles and there's bottles and all. Is that litter? If it's litter, could you call that sacred litter? And here, 2 roadside shrines where somebody died. The left one was a shrine I photographed in Peru. And the right one is somewhere in the Midwest, I think. A kid died, apparently, possibly these people's son. And all types of offerings. Here's one in Mendocino County. And the reason I show this is if you look at these roadside shrines, you'll often see coins, just like right here. In addition to pebbles and mementos and beads and all. This was a guy that died up in Mendocino, and it's a spontaneous shrine that grew near where he died. Why the coins? Marilyn Monroe's vault in Southern California, where her remains or ashes are buried. Look at the coins over here. See that? Have you ever noticed on gravestones, especially of celebrities, you'll see a lot of coins, or you'll see coins, maybe not a lot. And certain other things, I see it with rock art. I don't necessarily like it, but when I go out and look at rock art boulders, I'll find quartz crystals and coins that aren't part of the archaeological site, but they've been introduced for whatever reason. New Agers, hippies, maybe some are indigenous people, but you'll see coins, you'll see crystals and other things in these sacred places, just like on top of Mount Diablo, or in this case, Marilyn Monroe's grave. Probably even better, here's Emmett Till's grave in the South. And you probably know the story of Emmett Till. Was killed when he was 14. Look at the coins. Why are people leaving coins on this grave? Flowers, I kind of understand, but what's with the coins? Now, years ago, I buried John Belushi, which sounds like a BS story, but it's true. I worked with Hollywood on the movie Wired. We filmed up in Mendocino County, and I had to dig a grave pit, which they played like was his grave to bury him in. And one of the exciting things is I worked with the artist, or actually I observed the artist. Here's Belushi's original gravestone. He's buried on Martha's Vineyard, and this is what it looks like. They've more recently changed it to a more conservative gravestone, but this was the original one here. And this is what Hollywood did to reconstruct it. And the question was, what do you leave on it? Because Belushi fans go and they leave beer cans and beer bottles and doobies and cigarette lighters and coins and flowers and you name it. And it was interesting watching the Hollywood artists reconstructing that here with this styrofoam Belushi headstone. And there were coins in the final. Probably my favorite is this is Wovoka's gravesite in Schurz, Nevada, on the Walker River Indian Reservation. Wovoka was the Numa spiritual leader who dreamed the ghost dance that became the ghost dance of 1890. And this is, you can see someone's left a flute. There's beads here, abalone shells with offerings and flowers. I had the great honor of befriending Wovoka's family a number of years ago and have worked with some of his family. Here I am with his great-granddaughter in a movie about his life called Ghost Dancers. And here we are out at the cemetery, and Joanne, his great-granddaughter, is cleaning up because she goes out ever so often because people leave all types of things on the grave. On this particular trip, a party of Lakota people had just been out 2 weeks earlier, and they had left traditional offerings to the four corners around this fence, around this grave. That was interesting seeing. But someone's left a pine cone here. Sometimes you'll see bird feathers and coins. You don't see it here, but these shells have a lot of coins in them. So what's with the coins? So let's call it purchase. What are you purchasing? This is where I look at my clock really fast, see where I'm at. If you know the story from Greek mythology of the river Styx, and Charon, he takes the dead across the river to the afterworld, but you have to pay for your ticket. And that's why people sometimes are buried with coins in their eyes in the old days. That coin is purchasing access to the next world. This is Britain here, Great Britain. These are coin trees. For hundreds of years, people come to these trees and they hammered coins into all the cracks and crevices for good luck. It's an old tradition for good luck. And more recently in Japan, these are Torii Gates, where pilgrims climbing Mount Fuji or other sacred places are coming into these wooden Torii Gates and doing the same thing, which isn't necessarily a good thing because it exposes the wood to climate and to weather, and it deteriorates the wood. But there are thousands of coins in these. And here's a photograph I took in northern Mongolia a number of years ago. The bus is stopped. The people get off the bus and they're leaving rocks and coins on the shrine here for good luck. Here I am in the desert many years ago, 40 years ago, when I could still squat without falling over. And I'm squatting beside a shrine, a rock cairn, and there's another one here. And this is a trail, and you can kind of see the trail right here where the cursor is going across the desert. And people are stopping here and praying and leaving either a rock or a broken piece of pottery. And maybe originally they broke a whole pot here for good luck, just like what I'm seeing off the top of Mount Diablo. Now, this is Russia, where I've been working in Russia. And here are two trailside or roadside shrines. Look at the money, cigarettes, the bread being left. And this is Lake Baikal in Siberia. These are Ovos, where they're tying these rags on trees. This is Great Britain again, same thing. These are called cluties, and they go back, 1,000 years or more. And you find them at sacred springs. Here's another one. Now, if you look in the spring, you can't see it, but you'll see a lot of coins in the spring. And one of them has been excavated, and they found lots and lots of Roman coins, 2,000-year-old coins in the sacred spring in England. And here's another even older site in England. It's an architectural site, and people today are leaving coins on it, just like we find on rock art sites here or on top of Mount Diablo. Here's a Shell Beach Labyrinth up here where I live in Sonoma County. And if you walk the trail, you always see piles of money along with other things, mementos and beads. Again, people are purchasing something. And this is real special. Here's an unknown painted cave in the North Bay. And what do you see there? Someone has put 55-cent in coins in this little crack. This is a very isolated cave that almost no one knows about for good reason. But someone got in there and they left an offering. Could have been an indigenous person. Might not have been. So to start making sense of this, because I'm running out of time here, here's the Trevi Fountain in Rome. Now, who in this room has been there before and thrown a coin? I bet someone has thrown a penny in the. There's one right there I can see. I can't see most of you. I'm just kidding about raising your hand. But one person did raise her hand here. Debbie did. Good for you. So again, lost things, litter, discarded things, sacrifice things. Can sacrifice equal sacred litter? That penny, what do you make of it? Now, if you're in downtown Santa Cruz and you're feeding the meter and you drop a penny, which you probably wouldn't now, but let's say you drop the penny in the old days, it rolls away. You can see it. You may not go over and bend over and get under a car to try to get that penny. You not just say it's not worth it, leave it. If you do that, it's litter. If you don't see where it went, it's lost. But it's not sacrifice. But if you take that same coin to the Trevi Fountain in Rome, or to a sacred spring, or to the top of Mount Diablo and throw it off, it becomes ceremonial trash or sacred litter. It's not the same penny then. It's the context of how it's being thrown away. So really quickly, let's talk about veils. Sacred springs, mountaintops, are portals. They're places where people can access the other world through thousands of years of our history. For Calvin and Hobbes, the underside of their bed is the same thing. Monsters live under the bed. Monsters are part of the supernatural world. Under the bed is a portal to the unknown. So are closets and basements. This is the movie Monsters. Remember the monsters that lived in the closet? It's a portal. When might a target be a portal? So think about concentrating to try to get a bullseye. All your focus is going into the center of that target or to the hoop. And then think about the concentric circle petroglyphs we have in California. We don't have a whole lot of them, and they tend to be we think they're old. 5 to 10,000 is my guess. But what's that about? Is it a target for people to focus? I think portals I think we come wired to envision portals. I think it's part of our basic wiring and makeup. In a sort of a Jungian way, to see these portals that allow us. It can be through meditation, it can be altered states, it can be drug use, whatnot. But there's various ways and traditions where people want to access this other world through portals. Here's one right here. Cracks and crevices all over the world, the ethnographic literatures tend to be portals to the other world. And the lizards and the snakes that you see darting in and out are often looked at as messengers. And that's why the Hopis dance with snakes, because they can take messages back to this other world. I have a hypothesis about a lot of our pitted boulders. I think they're used in an effort to have an altered state of consciousness by what I call stone drumming, rhythmic beating. And the one example are the so-called ethnographic Pomo baby rocks, where a woman who wants to have a child, but she can't conceive, goes to a doctor and he says, go to this rock, or she says, go to this rock. And you do a certain ceremony that requires fasting and going without sleep and water for 3 or 4 days. And then right at the point you're about to pass out, die, you go into the rock and you find the unborn spirit of the child that you're going to give birth to, and you bring them back. That's an altered state of consciousness. But somehow it's probably working because these rocks are covered with pits and grooves. Whether they were working psychologically, removing some sort of blockage, or the medicinal properties in the rock, which is being ingested, had a pharmaceutical effect. I don't know, but something was happening. And then one of the last veils, this is a San rock art site in South Africa. If you talk to the San people, let me go back, those are real animals and real people in the other world. And there's a veil that most people can't pass through to access them, but doctors can. There's an actual veil, and you can see them through the veil. And I'll tell you, this is another veil. This is the Vietnam Wall. And people come to here to make contact with lost loved ones. And there's a very, very present veil. And on the other side are the memories and the people. Like this here, a pair of old boots left anywhere else would probably be frowned on. But here at the Vietnam Wall, beside this wall of names, they enter the realm of the sacred. I think those are sacred boots, to be honest. I'd love to know the story. Who wore them? Um, what are they doing there? It's not litter. If you found them on the sidewalk, you would say probably a homeless person left them, and maybe they just get thrown away. Here, they're different. The national parks, they collect what's left at the memorial, and they can't keep everything. So they have a system for deciding what to keep and what to discard. But everything they pick up every single day, they treat with care because these are sacred objects. They're sacred, they're sacrificed items, a whole range of things that are brought there. So think about the Vietnam War. Think about this veil that on the other side is this other supernatural world or heaven, if you will, or whatever you want to call it. And people come here to make contact. And if you go there, you'll see money, you'll see pennies, you'll see a lot of photos, combat boots, and the like. So my final slide, going back to Mount Diablo, determining sacred litter. If I look at the top of Mount Diablo in the Summit Museum, I think it's a water fountain, but it's also there's a veil there, and anything thrown goes through that veil and goes into this other reality. If you're throwing coins for good luck or good health or success, you're actually purchasing that, just like throwing it into a wishing well. Um, if that's part of the collective unconscious, I can't figure out. Here's something that's shocking. I figure there's 20,000 coins on the mountain, at least 20,000. I surveyed 1/2 of 1% of the upper slope, only art I could see, and I didn't dig through the rock. That's just what was on the surface. So for 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, probably 10,000, maybe 20,000, maybe more than that. People aren't going up there seeing people throwing coins and doing the same thing. I think mostly are being thrown independent of one another. There's never more, except on a busy weekend. You're usually the only one up on the roof when you go up there. So people aren't, they're independently inventing this thing of throwing coins. So they're seeing something, and I think they're seeing a wishing well. And I think that's what Mount Diablo is for a lot of people. And it's a way to connect with this other world. So sacred litter, I think the coins are sacred litter. The broken beer bottles, maybe, maybe not be. Styrofoam cups that blew away, no way. Ultimately, it's all trash. And we don't want it up there. Even the coins, because the metal brings problems into the water table up there or into the environment. But an archaeologist dealing with the artifacts has to recognize that there's different levels of litter, and every artifact has its own story. And some of the stories are worth noting and telling, which hopefully this has been tonight. So I think, yeah, that's my last slide. And we still have a little bit of time for questions, I think. And hopefully everybody enjoyed that. Hopefully it wasn't too far out.
I see somebody's got their hand up. Lynn, go ahead and ask the question.
Hi there. I was wondering, as you were talking about the coins and the Vietnam Wall, that the wall is a place where people make contact with lost loved ones. And there's the concept of pennies from heaven, that if you find coins, you can make the correlation that they're in unusual places. So you make a correlation with our loved ones that have passed. So have you considered that it
You
is
know,
kind of an ancient tradition of that kind of communication that we're
I
promoting?
in some cases there's something there. And I just in the last few days, I prepared this presentation a couple months ago so I could go ahead and get it ready. And then in the last week, I've gone back and it's like, oh no, this won't do. And I got to add this and I got to change. So I made a lot of changes and I did some more research and I came across the pennies from heaven. I'd completely forgot about that. So I just barely got into it. Uh, it's something I want to take a look at more. If you think about if there's 20,000 coins on Mount Diablo and maybe however many thousands on Mount East Peak of Mount Tamalpais, and there's coins probably on Mount Fuji, and there's different stories. There's not just one explanation of one story. And the pennies from heaven makes a lot of sense, especially in certain contexts. Uh, I don't have a good answer for you, but I want to look into that more. That's a great point that you brought up. Maybe someone else has an idea about that too.
Can I ask another question as we're waiting? I was wondering with the is it Novoku or the Indian grave?
Wovoka, Jack, I think it Jack's Anglo name.
The things that were left there. Do you know of interest, the things that were left, especially considering his, role with the ghost dance, things that were very interesting?
Yeah, I've been to his grave a number of times with his family. I wouldn't go without the family. Other people do, tourists stop by sometimes that find out, and it's easily accessible right beside the highway, the cemetery. And I think the family just would request that you not go inside the little fenced area. He and his wife are buried inside a little fence gate that you stand outside it. Um, but things are always being left there. The family has to come out every so often and kind of clean it up because even like flowers, beautiful flowers, kind of turn ugly at some point, and it looks unkempt, and you don't want it looking unkempt. And food might get left, and that can become a problem later. But if I went to John Belushi's gravestone or Marilyn Monroe's gravestone or Jim Morrison's gravestone in Paris, you're going to see a certain type of artifact. I was looking at Pigpen. Remember Pigpen from the Grateful Dead? He's buried in Southern California. And there's always like guitar picks and Grateful Dead decals and coins and beer bottles, whiskey bottles on his gravestone. I didn't see that at Wovoka's grave. I don't see alcohol. And there might be a cultural reason for that, or it just might be a respect issue. Pigpen is remembered for being a partier. He and Janis Joplin, they drank hard liquor, and all the photos you see, he died at 27. He was sort of a party animal, a beautiful man, but a party animal. And you see that in the offerings. Well, Wovoka was a spiritual leader. He was a dreamer. He was a visionary. And he had a very different story. And to leave a whiskey bottle at his grave would be so sacrilegious. I can't imagine that. You could do that on Pigpen's grave and maybe Janis Joplin's grave. You could not do that in good conscience. Why would you do that with Voka? So what I'm seeing in that one photo, you saw a wooden flute. Someone had left a flute there. The time the Lakota party came, and remember when he had his vision, the Lakotas in 1889, 1890, the Lakota sent a delegation all the way from the plains to Nevada to talk to Wovoka to find out about the vision. And as it got transferred back, what he said to do, how to dance, how to sing, it got misinterpreted a lot. And finally, by the time it got back to the plains, some of the young men interpreted what he said to mean if you put a certain type of bird on your shirt, it'll repel bullets. And those were the ghost shirts, and it got misinterpreted, and it led to the massacre at Wounded Knee. But Wovoka was all about the return of the bison, the return of the people, and living in peace again. So when the Lakota came a few years ago, when I was there, they left ribbons. If you go to like Wounded Knee, the fence around the massacre cemetery is covered with colored ribbons, kind of like those sacred wells in England or the shrines in Siberia. They're covered with ribbons, but they're all like the four primary colors at the Lakota, yellow, white, black, and red. The same thing happened at Wovoka's grave 2 weeks before I got there. On the north, south, east, and west side of the fence, there were colored ribbons that had been left. Also some buffalo grass, sweet grass. There were, little bundles of that left there. So very, very traditional indigenous types of offerings rather than guitar picks and whiskey bottles. Guitar picks and whiskey bottles are probably appropriate, for Pigpen and, Jim Morrison, because that's the story we know. That's not the story we understand about Wovoka. So you can see that difference. And the coins, whether they're being left by Native people or by non-Native people, I would assume the latter. But I know a couple of rock art sites in Nevada where Native people, when they're going out, and this is in the 50s and 60s, to gather, they'd stop at the site and leave coins and bobby pins and in the cups on this rock. They would leave something before they went out and took. So those coins might have been left by other Paiute people, as far as I know, at Wovoka's grave. Anyway, hopefully that's a half answer, a good answer.
I'm sorry, I can't find a way to raise my hand. I have a question.
Hey, John.
Hey, Breck. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. lot of good questions. I'm pondering. One of them is, do you think there's any universal uh, traits along cultures? I was thinking, you're asking about the coins. I was thinking the shell beads that are offered, kind of the money as one of the universal things. Tobacco seems to be another one that comes to mind for me. Are there any offerings or sacred litter that you think kind of seem to cross across most cultures, if not all, that you found in your research? And just a comment about the coins and native people. I've been to rock art sites where I've seen native people leave coins a couple
Yeah,
of instances.
yeah.
So I think it's like, yeah.
I think coin is more or less a universal medium now. I've seen them all over the world. And in some areas like Japan with the Torii Gates, that started probably in the 1970s. So it's a little more recent. In Great Britain, the coins in the springs and in the trees go back, hundreds of years, if not thousands. So I think the coin is becoming more of a universal medium, but tobacco is another. And without getting into specifics, if I travel to certain places, including going and meeting with the Paiute, I carry tobacco as not an offering at a grave, but as a gift to the family that I'm eating with or going with, and it's universal. And these are necessarily not people that are going to smoke it. They're just going to have it's exchange. And I took a big piece of obsidian here a few years ago to a family. And it was this gorgeous piece of obsidian, and they loved it. And I don't think they're flint nappers, but you don't have to be to appreciate it. It's the exchange. And I think that's what's happening on Mount Diablo. Some of the things that are getting thrown off, especially the coins, it's a purchase. It doesn't matter if it's a penny or a dime or a quarter. Now, if you're trying to get across the river Styx 2,000 years ago, maybe it was important how big a coin it was, gold versus silver. But these days, I think it's just the idea that counts. It could be a penny. And the tobacco is a really good thing. There's a tobacco brand. Is it called Spirit? Has an indigenous design on the front. And I know a lot of native friends of mine prefer that one.
American Spirit, I think it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I don't smoke. I mean, I smoked 50 years ago, but I don't smoke. But I love the smell. It's if you're exchanging gifts with a family or if you're visiting a gravesite or what, I would never drop tobacco on the ground. But if I'm with someone that has the right to do that, and they want to, it's kind of nice watching that. In the wrong context, though, that would become litter, or vandalism. You walk into Walmart and start dropping tobacco everywhere, people are probably not going to like it. But it's all about the context, and yeah.
Breck, there's a few comments in the chat here. We have Mary Gerbic has a picture of Seacliff Beach. It says, "Never forget beach trash," with a sticker, maybe to pick it up after you've gone.
Yeah.
And let's see.
I was looking at a photo when Princess Di died. I saw a photo of one of the her home or something there. And as far as you could see, and this was like hundreds and hundreds of yards, were teddy bears and flowers and whatnot. And you realize that's beautiful. It's overpowering, but someone's going to have to clean it up at some point. And that's what the national park realizes, but you want to do it properly. So like the Vietnam Wall, the memorial, you can't just let things, it would get so bad that you couldn't see the wall. There would be such piles of offerings. So it has to be dealt with. But what I'm saying as far as an archaeologist, understand that some of this has to be dealt with in a different way than if it was just truly litter. Someone goes to the garbage can in the campground, it's full, so they just throw all their stuff on the ground, and then the bears and the raccoons spread it around. It's like, it's ugly, and someone's got to go in there with proper gear and clean it all up. That's a different way of cleaning up than the National Park Service person that's picking up the offerings at the end of the day at the wall. Maybe they end up going to the same place, but you handle them with a different level of respect. Same thing like you would never leave a beer can at Wovoka's grave. You might do that at Pigpen's or Janis Joplin, but you would never leave a beer can as an offering at Wovoka's grave. And same thing, you want to understand context, and every artifact has a story, including a beer can. So yeah, clean the beaches. It's especially the plastic stuff and the styrofoam, and Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the funny part of the sticker was that it's the never forget, as if you're in memorial to somebody. A few more comments here. Dave Fiaro says, I found the children's bell tower and the bells left on the trees a beautiful place.
Oh, yeah.
And he provided a picture. There's a comment from Kimberly Wooten. There was a group of Portuguese archaeologists that documented the plastic litter that remains behind after modern religious festival, such as the plastic cups to hold hot wax for handheld memorial candles. They note how all the discarded cups are removed overnight, removing them from tourists and religious pilgrims' view. It's as if the litter didn't happen. Where do you see that line between what is litter and what is spiritual? Should any of it remain? I think you hit on that a little bit just previously.
Yeah. At Mount Diablo, the coins will mostly remain because there's just not an easy way of going out and retrieving them all. And partly because it's a dangerous slope. They're hard to see. You would do so much more disturbance to the slick and slide, raking the rock to get at the coins or getting up under the brush, that I don't think there would be an easy way. Maybe in the future, there'll be a big drone magnet thing that pulls them out of the ground. But right now, I don't see how you would collect all of that. So you almost have to live with that. But what I also saw up there is during the 3C days when they were building the Summit Museum, they were throwing paint buckets down the hill and this and that, all types of stuff, batteries. Any battery I saw, I collected and recycled. We had a little studio apartment there in the 70s, and we had a ranger living there. And I think whenever a light bulb went out, sometimes they go out and throw them down the hill because I found broken light bulbs. And should that remain? No. And anything styrofoam, I picked up all the styrofoam I could, carefully marked it down what it was. But like the celebrity grave, should anything, Emmett Till's grave, Marilyn Monroe, I think it would get out of hand. Maybe not Emmett Till's grave. I haven't seen any photographs where it's out of hand, but if you go online and look at Jim Morrison's grave in Paris, it can get out of hand. John Belushi's grave, they didn't really want him being there in Martha's Vineyard, but they gave in and they put him just inside a gate at the far end of the cemetery, so that if all these fans are there, raising heck or leaving beer cans, it won't disturb the other buried people. But he had this really unique headstone. And I noticed in more recent years, if you go online and look at his gravestone, it's different. It's more of a traditional gravestone now. So at some point, the family or the cemetery or somebody switched it out. And I don't know if it's still getting, that much. As time goes on, less and less people know who he was. That's the reality of a celebrity death. Marilyn Monroe will probably always remember her. I assume we'll always remember John Belushi. But it may not be as messy as far as the beer cans and the half-eaten sandwiches and whatever's being left on his grave. That eventually might not be that. But overall, I think if people are envisioning a portal or a veil and they're leaving offerings, they assume it's gone. It's gone into this other world. So if we discreetly come in professionally and properly and clean up afterwards, I don't think that's a problem. But I'm just saying to archaeologists, be aware. And there might be some information that you want to record for the future. Contemporary archaeology has a lot of possibilities for helping us better understand where we're going and how we got here. But someone has to be looking at that. You can't just say, if it's not 50 years old, it doesn't matter. We're making more archaeological sites every day. We're losing a lot of the old places, and we're creating a lot of new places. And someone has to understand the archaeology of new places. Or we'll run out of archaeologists.
Okay, I've got a few more comments from the chat. Jane says, how would you classify the padlocks left on the bridge in Paris?
There's an archaeologist in Great Britain, Sari Holbrook's her name. She did her PhD dissertation on those love locks. And I saw one of her articles and I got in touch with her, and we've become colleagues and exchanged information. And I've read a lot of her work. And it's incredible, but it's also dangerous. And there are some bridges where there are so many padlocks, they have to come in and remove them for structural reasons, the weight of them. So again, my thought is that it's kind of like the Vietnam Wall. Maybe you keep some of them somewhere. Maybe there's a padlocked museum somewhere, but do you need them all? And at what point do you have collapsing bridges and fences and all? Because they're heavy, but they're also very personal. What I've seen, I'm no longer working for state parks, and I haven't been up on Mount Diablo in 12, 13 years. But the more recent coins, not the old coins, but the more recent coins I saw often had people's initials on them in magic marker. And maybe people were doing that in the 60s or 50s, and the weather was removing the magic marker, but it almost felt like that was a new tradition. And I think it would be interesting looking at the love locks to see how they evolve through time. Did they start out just being locks and they become very personalized now? But ultimately, there's so many of them that to an engineer, I think they're a threat in certain contexts, and they have to be removed. Maybe you don't stop people from putting new ones, but at least you go in and harvest or recover what's there. And if you do that, if you're a municipality or a government or a business, I would encourage you to hire an archaeologist or a historian or someone and document what you're finding before you discard it. There's probably something interesting there.
Okay, yeah. And Charles says one of my favorite sites is in Lee Vining. I've seen a variety of memorialization, coins, poker chips, whiskey bottles, and other odds and ends left by tourists.
I'm trying to remember what Lee Vinings is. Is that a town or is that a site?
That's over by Mono Lake on the
Okay.
Eastern Sierra.
And these are like trailside offerings, stopping places, or
Sounds like
Charles
that. I think it's
Spencer?
just, yeah, a comment.
Yeah.
And
I'm not familiar with it, but it doesn't surprise me. You can take a ride. My son and I took a trip on Highway 66, Route 66 a few years ago, and a lot of places you stop, for good or bad, have these types of offerings, and it's kind of like graffiti. You start seeing graffiti everywhere. Now you start seeing in parts of the world the locks, and then you start seeing the pennies and the little teddy bears and all. And I'm not saying they're all bad, but there's a lot of people. There's 8.5 billion of us in the world now, and you have to understand. First time I went to Petrified Forest, I wasn't going to take any petrified wood. I was 19 years old, but the ranger must have thought I was, because he drove over, parked, got out, walked where I was standing, looking at this beautiful petrified wood, and said, he did this beautiful speech. He said, we get so many millions a year visitors. If everybody took one little piece, it'd be gone in 20 years. That stayed with me. I never forgot that. The impact of so many of us. So if we're all putting locks on bridges, if we're all doing graffiti, and if we're all leaving candles on the beach, we're going to make a mess at some point. So there has to be a system for dealing with that. Maybe there's proper places to do graffiti, and there's other places that you don't do it. A lot of cities have done that. They've allowed walls to be graffiti as a way to try to stop it. Maybe there's places, so many locks until they all get removed. I don't know.
okay, I think, yeah, I'm scrolling down farther and I see Charles, who wrote about Lee Vining, put a grave site, and it's the grave of the unknown prospector. And so I think,
Actually, Charles is a friend of mine, and I think I recently saw a photo he shared with me. Now that
yes,
I think about it. Yeah,
yes,
now that's why it's familiar. Yeah.
right
I
there
haven't
in
been there.
the
I'd
chat.
like to see that, actually.
Mhm.
You can get Nevada is really interesting. The Great Basin, there's shoe trees aside the road where people throw shoes. They tie their sneakers together, throw them over limbs, and there can be 100 shoes, some of them going back quite a few years on these trees. What's that about? We have this innate need inside us to do something like that. And is it part of our hardwiring that we're connecting, or is it vandalism, throwing your shoes over a tree? What's it all about? I'd like to think it's something positive. I want to think that at the end of the day, we're all positive, and we're trying to affect better lives and more health and success for the world, whether it's with shoes or pennies or candles or locks. And hopefully that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. So another comment. I think as the world changes to have a more of a universal culture, money becomes a central value. So coins retain their importance no matter the culture. due to the universal monetary focus.
That's a good point, and I think that's true. But I think it's also going to change pretty soon, from the sounds of it. We're no longer going to make the penny, and most of the coins I've seen left, in springs and streams and Mount Diablo, they're usually pennies. So there will be a stratigraphic marker there in the future. People continue throwing coins off of Mount Diablo, we're going to see, higher denomination at some point. But with the cryptocurrency and digital wallets and all of that, it'll be interesting. But there'll always be coins. And if coins are being used for supernatural purchase, not necessarily going to a 7-Eleven, buy a candy bar, but for supernatural purchase, like throwing in a wishing well or off the mountain or leaving it, at Wovoka's grave, I think people will always have a few coins to do that with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mary says Conway Summit on Highway 395, all the railings are like this, and she shows a picture with a bunch of bumper stickers on it. That's
bumper stickers, right?
Julia says, I'm Greek Orthodox, and after a memorial service for a departed loved one, we give out memorial wheat berries served in a little paper cup. The cups are all gathered afterward and burned instead of discarded because they are considered sacred.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's nice.
That's really cool.
And then John says, are killed grave goods killed for the use in the afterlife, or so the dead are not attracted to return to the living?
Huh. I would think for use in the afterlife, but that's a good question. I'd have to think more about that. You don't want the dead returning. In fact, in California, a lot of tribes avoid the name of the dead for so long, for a certain amount of time, because while the recently departed loved one is on their journey to the next world, you don't want to say their name loud because they might go, what? And they come back. And even your most beloved grandmother or brother or husband as a departed spirit can cause problems. Maybe not intentionally, but you want them to have a healthy, safe trip to the next world. And you don't want to have them come back in that way. So you avoid the name. And maybe for the same reason, you avoid all their things. I don't know. I would like to think, though, still, a lot of these killed things are going with that person. So as they walk this road to the next world, they're carrying their favorite tools and their favorite bowls and whatnot. But, there's probably more than one explanation. History and culture is so vast that there's room for all types of explanations at different times among different people.
Yeah, and there was a comment responding to that was similar. She says, usually they're used to honor the dead and give them the items in the afterlife, but it varies per culture, of course, and the majority are for use in the afterlife.
Yeah.
A couple more things. There's a picture of Manzanar memorial at Manzanar. And a comment about the urban practice on power lines of throwing shoes. And someone, Lalima, comments that's often to signify drug deals and territories in some places as well as for memorials to loved ones, of course, but in urban areas, more of the former.
I didn't know that. We're talking about the roadside memorials or the shoes?
The shoes, yeah. We're kind of jumping around here, but
I didn't realize that. I'll write that in my notebook when we get off tonight. My journal. There's a couple things I want to write down.
Okay, does anybody else have any more comments or questions for Breck? All right, well, let's everybody give a big hand.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Breck.
Oh, it's delightful.
Yeah, that was very interesting. And yes, just a reminder, SCAS will take 2 months off for our speaker meetings, and we'll be back in a couple months. And thanks again, Breck. And
so if I understand, you're actually going to put this on the SCAS YouTube channel at some point.
Yes.
Yeah, I will upload this. Yeah, go ahead.
I will upload this to the YouTube channel, and you guys can share and view it there as well.
So if I went fast through slides, or if you saw something in writing, you didn't have a chance to see what it said, you can go on the SCAS YouTube channel, see this, and see what you missed,
Yes.
which is nice. Well,
We
thanks
got
for
a
inviting me.
lot of comments thanking you for an excellent presentation.
Well, it's a great group. I've known SCAS since Rob Edwards was a young guy. My old friend Rob, who I thought about because he would have been here otherwise. He would have been one of the faces. And we lost Rob not long ago, a couple of years ago. But yeah, you're a really good group. Those who are here tonight that aren't members, I would really encourage you to think about joining. Now more than ever, we need to support groups like this. Education, public inquiry, everything's kind of like on the table right now. And joining Santa Cruz Archaeological Society would be good in a lot of different ways. And in a couple of years, when they invite me back to talk again, you'll be able to hear again.
Yes.
I think I've done these every couple of years for a while. So
Yeah, it's only what, $25 a year. It's not going
it's
to
a
break
great
the
deal.
bank.
Great
Helps
deal.
us out a lot. All right. Well, thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Breck.
Good night. Good night, John. Thanks, Sarah.